Hi, my name's Lance. It really is great to see you. Now, I get a lot of questions about how to shape the limbs, on women especially, as well as men. So I'm going to share what I can, and hopefully there'll be something in that you can find useful. Now, I'll go through a really simple way to shape the limbs, very simple, very specific rules that'll get you started, and of course you can take it further and stylize it however you like from there. Now, for today's lesson, we'll be using the Shortstack body type as our practice type, just because it has a lot of limb shape in a very small space, so it's perfect for expressing these techniques. But we'll also be showing how it applies to other body types, and some subtle differences between male and female presenting figures, and simple rules on how to do those differentiations. Then I'll do a short demo on specifically just some different body types, and we'll do then some short stacks at 3 different head heights. Now that's going to be important because if you go to too few head heights, you'll end up doing a chibi, and that's fine, but that's a different thing. So how to differentiate those and how that looks stylistically. Lastly, I'll put it all together and we'll do a quick speed paint, and I'll show you how these techniques fit in to a complete workflow of an illustration from start sketch all the way to finished work. And now, sensei to shite shukudai o dashimasu. So, since I am a teacher, I will be including a link to some homework sheets in the description that you can download, import into whatever drawing software you use, or just print them and draw over them in pencil, and try out some of these yourself with some of the underlying construction shapes pre-drawn, just to save you some time. Alright, so let's get started. So here's where we're going to begin. So we'll start with the 3 steps. Firstly, making the limbs as a very simple shape, so a tapering sort of carrot shape that tapers from thick to thin as it goes from the core of the body out. Then breaking the limb sections up into thirds to then decide how to thicken them. Keeping in mind things like how this rule will apply slightly differently to the upper arm, which instead of getting thicker for the first third and then thinner for 2/3, it has sort of a chicken drumstick shape where it's thicker at the top and then it goes straight. And then we'll talk a little bit about the thighs. Now thighs will be on women, thicker for the first third and narrowing for the next 2/3. But on men, since they have a different pelvis, the thighs will shape differently as well. So they'll actually thicken for the first 2/3 and then narrow for the last third. So here's some figures. We'll just draw up some basic skeleton parts. So these are the parts that have no flesh. So head, rib cage, and pelvis. We'll start with a male figure, a short stack figure, just a very small sort of childlike figure, and then we'll go for a very slender androgynous figure. Now with those drawn, we can now start detailing them in and giving a bit of shape. So we'll just do very basic construction here, so I'm not going to detail them very much. I'm just going to do the basic shapes and very simplified musculature. Now these limb shapes, they include musculature. That's why they are the shape they are. So very simple torso on this one. And you'll notice with the male figure, the ribs are larger than the pelvis. So here we do the arms. You notice with the upper arm, the first third is a bulge, the next 2/3 are where it narrows or tapers, and then with the forearm, thickens for the first third, narrows for the next 2/3. Now this is the male figure. So the thighs are slightly different on the male figure. They thicken for the first 2/3 and then narrow for the last third. But then we go to the calves, and just like on the female figures, they get thicker for the first third and narrow for the next 2/3. And to make this a bit clearer, what I might do is I'll throw some color on, so it'll be a blue color where it's thickening and a green color where it's tapering and narrowing. And you can see overall these limbs still taper from thick to thin. So regardless of build, regardless of gender, you'll have limbs that go from thick to thin. Now stylistically, there'll be some illustrative styles where they'll actually get thicker towards the end. So things like some cartoons and anime, they'll have like straight limbs, or they'll get thicker towards the end. But in this case, without that particular stylization, we're going to go for going from thicker to thinner. So limbs will always tend thicker to thinner. Even in muscular figures, slender figures, the rules are the same. And so here we'll start on the female one, just mark out the features of the face roughly. And again, you can see the upper arm, break it into the thirds. Top third is a bulge, next 2/3 are straight or tapering. And then the forearm, again, break it up into the thirds. First third thickens, next 2/3 narrow. And just finish off the torso there. Adding a bit of detail to the pelvis, just so we've got enough to work from. Now here's where, someone mentioned a hip dip, so that would just be the fact that the the thigh starts halfway down the pelvis, so there should be one there. Now, depending on how much body fat they have, those dips and curves and dimples will be diminished. It's sort of like adding a smooth layer on top of everything, and so you'll lose those details. So you can have fairly thick figures that still have a fairly low body fat content, so they'll still show a lot of shape. And you can see here with this very small sort of childlike figure, we're ending up with a lot of the same rules as well. So just throwing some ears on there just to make it a bit of a fantasy setting, and adding the more shape to the torso there. And again, even with a very small, very slight figure, the rules are the same. Top third thickest on the upper arm, then tapering or narrowed for the next 2/3. Same with the thighs, same with the calves. So along those lines, break them up into thirds and place the thicker or thicker parts there as you go. Now here's a very slim figure where there isn't very much limb shape, but this is actually where it's probably more important, because the limb shape you have is subtle but more important. You don't have as much room for easy expression. To have the limb look right, you've got to use a more nuanced approach to it. So just giving the head a bit of shape there, throwing the neck down, and just one of the things you'll notice with my works is I'll have to quite often pull the head down a little bit. I tend to draw much longer necks, so that's something to be aware of. So if you're following along at home, maybe draw the neck a little shorter. And so here you can see the upper arm, break it into thirds, so it's straight for the 2/3 and thickest at the top, and then with the forearm, thickens for the first third and narrows and tapers for the next 2/3. It's subtle, but they still do have those shapes to them. And again, really thin, sort of spindly legs, the same rule will apply. So even on, you can see there the difference between this figure and the one just 2 figures to the left. They're very different builds, but the way you curve the limbs is the same. And you can see here, I'm illustrating that all of the limbs, regardless of build, they'll all sort of narrow and go from thick towards the core of the body, the torso, to narrow towards the feet, like the ankles and the wrists. This is going to be true on very muscular figures or very slender figures. It's going to be true on any of them, so it's an easy way to get your basic shape in. And now just go over these and add some blue to where the limbs are thickening as they go out, and then some green to where they are tapering, or in the case of the upper arms, to where they're not widening, where they're staying straight. So the next thing we'll do is we'll do a figure at a few different head heights. So this one's going to be just 3 head heights. This is definitely in your Chibi territory, or SD. And so we'll start with the first third will be, of course, for the head, and then the next 2/3 will be for the body. Easy way to remember is that the legs, or the bottom part of the pelvis, should be at the midpoint of the length of the body, not including the head. So remove the head, and then if you measure halfway down, that'll be the crotch point. And that'll help you get the legs the right length as well. So here we're just doing those same rules. Now, just a word on how to do like thigh bulge. Remember that the bulge happens above where the sock or thigh height constricts. So it will bulge out above, not below. And then just adding some detail in for a sort of very simple outfit. And maybe some boots. Maybe not some boots. We'll see how we go. And just moving some stuff around. Just to get that face roughly right. And a little bit of eyelash detail there, and shaping the face with a very sort of chibi sort of proportions there. And that's looking okay. Just a simple sort of messy hairdo. And big sort of goblin ears. Maybe some collars. And making the ends of the fingers kind of fat too, just to make them sort of cutesy. Because the spindly fingers can be cute, but if you want something sort of more bestially cute, you want sort of thicker fingers towards the end, sort of like paws. Now this one's going to be 4 heads height. So this is your mid-range, so we'll do head just like normal. We're going to put the shoulders out a little further than we would for a much slighter figure, just because they're going to be a wider build. If this was a very slim figure, I'd pull the shoulders in a bit closer. And so here you can see getting those limbs thicker for the first third, narrowing for the next 2/3. And doing the same thing for the upper arms. And just adding in the breast as well. Pulling that head down, because again, I do tend to add a bit too much length to the neck. It's a known issue. And also just squashing the head down a little bit as a quick way of making it wider. And just adding a bit of a cute expression there. Now I want this to be sort of very cutesy, So I'm putting all of the face in the bottom half. So your eyes will be the midpoint of the head, but if you move the eyes below the midpoint of the head, you'll get a much sort of cuter expression. But it's got to be on a body that it makes sense for. Like you wouldn't put that on a very tall, lanky body. It would look very strange. So just getting the other one in there to remember roughly what the outfit was I was designing. And you can see again, it bulges above the sock, not below. So because the sock or boot or whatever it is constricting. And now here, when you bend the elbow, it's important to remember that bending the elbow will push that bone out and it'll squash the muscles out sideways. So the bone will protrude when you bend your elbow, and the muscles will squash to the sides and become thicker than they are when the arm is straight. So just adding a bit more detail there, adding a bit more of the hands, and just smoothing those shapes out. So you start with a sort of coffin shape. Now here on the ankle, easy way to remember where to put the bumps of the ankle, that little ball joint you use to start the foot there, the sides of those will be bumps. And then how to do the toes, you'll split the foot into thirds. The first third of the width of the front of the foot is the big toe, and the remaining section, split that into 4 for the toes, because the big toe is larger than the other toes. So it gets a third of the width, and then the other toes are smaller, so they'll get the remaining distance split between them. So next we'll move on to shaping the arm, remembering then that the top half of the arm, so the upper arm, has a round bit at the top, goes straight for 2/3, and then the forearm gets thicker and then narrows and tapers for 2/3. That's those drawn in. So now we're getting some shading on the thigh highs and just adding a bit of the fingers on the right hand side, comparing it to the other figure and adding a bit of eye detail, maybe a bit of blush. This one's more of sort of a bashful look to it, and sort of messing up the hair a little bit, trying to roughly the same hairdo as the previous one. I'm not terribly concerned with getting it exactly right. And now we'll move on to a 5 heads high character. So remember, the body will be split into, so the full length of the body, not including the head, the midpoint of that will be the bottom of the crotch. So you can see there the first of the 5 head spaces, that's for the head and neck, and then the remaining section, we can split that into torso for the first half of the body, and then legs for the remaining bit, just to get those distances right. And here we're getting the limbs in. Again, same rule, thicker at the top, narrowing and tapering as you go down. Remembering that the bumps of the ankle go on the sides of that little ball joint there where the foot adds on. And it's getting the shape roughly right, so we'll get the details on there. Again, we're going for very cutesy, so you're going to let the eyes be sort of low and wide, just to make them cuter, make the character seem smaller and more diminutive, and making sure those eyebrows are up and out, because the eyebrows aren't on the same flat surface plane as the eyes, they're separate now. And adding some detailing then to the outfit. And that's looking okay, and pulling that head down, because again, I do have trouble with making the necks too long. It is, as said, a known issue. And that's looking okay, so just rubbing it out there to soften it, and adding some more of those bits of detail in. A very simple outfit for this one, just to show the body. And again, adding the tops of the thighs there with the bulge out on top. Maybe going for some fingerless gloves this time, maybe some earrings, just getting a bit more detail. This is probably more where we're going to go for the final figure, although I'm not sure if I want as much sort of black leather on there. I'll get to that in another video. I've had a few people ask how to draw leather and vinyl, and it's actually very, very straightforward, so I'll definitely make something about that. I'm just making the figure a bit more appealing there. Getting a bit of detail in. Yeah, like the look of that. And so let's just make a lineup of them so we can compare. So we'll have our 3 heads tall figure on the left, our 4 heads tall figure in the middle, and our 5 heads tall figure on the right hand side. And you can see that difference in head heights and how it expresses and what sort of figure you end up with. Keeping those same very thick proportions there, you can see that the one on the left is more, it looks like a chibi. It doesn't look like this is how it appears in the world. It looks like this is a cutesified version of it for things like a comic or whatever. But as we move to the 4 and 5 heads, that one becomes then a more believable, this is how tall the character is kind of thing. And so just adding a bit of shading in there just to communicate some of the volumes to make sure that I've got the shapes right. The reason you can throw a bit of shading on there as a way of helping you draw is it'll help you check to see if the volumes make sense all the shapes make sense when they're shaded. Alright, so now let's apply those to a finished illustration. So we'll decide on this one. I'm thinking we'll do the 4 heads high, so the midpoint of those 3 figures we did, and we'll do them sitting up on something. So I'm just getting the figure out here, and this is probably where most limb shaping is going to be the most important. This is the starting sketch where we shape the basic figure. So getting all the proportions right, maybe lifting it up, shortening that neck, and widening the figure there. Now I've got the chest tilted back a bit, which means you'll draw the breasts higher on the chest, because if you tilt back, since they're on the outer surface, they'll start much higher up. And so we're going to have them sitting on something, maybe less of a messy hair, or less sort of spiky hair, and just something a bit more manageable, just so we've got a bit more space around them for things like lighting in the background. And we'll do a relatively detailed background on this one, and doing a little middle bit on the strap on the outfit there, just to explain some part of how the outfit works, and maybe adding a big fat tail, just because the left-hand side of the figure was looking a bit sort of desolate there. And trying to communicate scale as well, so the earrings there having like full-size human like finger rings being used as small jewelry, and then starting on the background. So getting a reference for how to get a tank card, and using the perspective tools just to save so much time. All drawing software will have some sort of perspective tools in them. Sai does, Clip Studio does, Photoshop does. It just saves you a lot of time trying to work the perspective. And then just getting the height right there. And so the rest of these are looking okay. So we can then start doing the inking, just basic inking, just a hard round brush. Any brush that's got a hard edge to it, and the only pressure sensitivity I have on it is opacity. Now I'm doing the jawline there. You notice that would have been a bright blue color. For parts of it where you want to do a bit of line art that you're going to have overlapping a bit of line art you've already done, get a new layer, do it in a different color, get it right, erase part of it so it looks nice, and then combine it later. And that can really help you get some of those detail parts in. Oh, and one other thing that can really help, if you're doing things like a fishnet pattern or anything else like that, do it on a separate inking layer, just so that you can turn it off temporarily, do your bucket fills, and then put it back down on top. Otherwise, you'll be bucket filling every single square as you go along, and that's work you don't need to do. And you can merge it later, but just keep any areas like that with a pattern of black over the top of your image, keep them separate. That can really help you just save a bit of time when you're doing the bucket fills later. So here you can see I'm just going over and doing a bit of adding a bit of line thickness, and just moving on to start the basic coloring. And doing a yellow, I think it's sclera, just to make it look more sort of monstery. And that pink there is just to see if I've got any gaps in where I've shaded it. And just starting then on the background. So just starting with a brown as a base, because overall I want the background to be a sort of warm brown, dungeon, tavern, fantasy sort of vibe. And not doing very much detail on it. I'm just adding just a couple of lines to communicate this is wood. Doing some shadows, darker shadows. Again, those perspective tools really save you a lot of time. I'm just going to leave the bottles and other things for last, just because I don't want to have to be painting around them. So I'm just going to do them once I've done the rest of it. Just some basic brickwork, and maybe a light from behind that I can use to give me an excuse to give a nice sort of strong rim light to describe the figure. Maybe some chains. Again, just doing very simple shapes. I just have to imply these things, so I don't have to actually draw them. And then getting in some of these bottles, just simple shapes, very muted colors. Even on a background, you don't want much saturation or bright contrast to pull attention away from the figure. The most interesting and attractive to the eye part of the image, should be the figure or the car or whatever it is you want the focus to be. So make sure you let that have the most color contrast. Make sure you let that have the most light and shadow contrast. So don't try and pull too much attention away. You'll often see backgrounds that pull attention away from the figure by having too much of that. And here I'm just doing a bit of simple lighting over it. And I'm keeping that tank card in front of the figure and just adjusting those colors for the background, and yeah, looks good. All right, now we can move on to shading the figure itself. So just simple shading, multiply a layer over top of the flats, and just throwing down tone. I will tune the color of the shading later. For now, I just want to get the values in, get everything looking okay, and maybe tone down the brightness of the green skin there, and just get the shadows in, blocking them in just based mainly on the biggest shadows. So I don't want to do too much shadow detail. I just want to block it in so the main cast shadows and the main things that aren't facing light source are done. I don't want to complicate the shape too much. And making one leg completely shaded, whereas the other one's got a bit of light to it, just to give the legs a bit of depth. They'd both be lit about the same in real life, but I want to push one of them back further. And then adding a bit of shine to the leathery parts of the outfit, and then some shading then on the gold bits. These, you can basically get away with anything. Just make sure you've got some more detail towards the edges in how you shade metallic objects than you do in the middle, and you'll be fine. And then just tuning some of the shading colors, looking right, getting the gems to look right, just sort of messing up those surfaces, and tuning the shading again, adding some more on the outfit, and just chiseling some of it away. Chiseling shading away is the same as highlighting, so then adding a bit more highlights, adding the actual highlights, a sort of a blue underlight one there, just to give it some color contrast of the warm colors from the background and from the light from above, and then doing the rest of the shines on the surface. Now it's going to be a very shiny body. If you do too much shine, it sort of flattens it out. So I'm doing more minimal, less pronounced large areas of shine. I'm going to do a very strong sort of rim light, but I'm just doing a few specks over the surface to communicate that, and then adding a bit of things like skin texture and some blush there to give the skin tone a bit of variation. You can do them blushing a different color, but I find red tends to make things look more sort of blushy. And then adding maybe a bit of skin scale texture and some makeup there, and some shine to the eyes, and that's pretty much it. So it's approaching done here. So I'm just doing some subsurface scattering to really make the flesh look fleshy, and then softening the line art there. And then lastly going over and doing a few things like darkening the eyelashes, and then this is an overlay layer just to make things sort of warm on top and cool on the underside. And then gradient overlay, get the colors right, and then give it a bit of glow, and there we are, we're finished. So this is the figure. This is the application of how to shape the limbs and body sections. And you can see it's turned out okay. It's got a good communication of form, it's got a good communication of shape in a very small space. And overall, I think the figure worked okay. So if you have any questions, any criticisms, anything at all on the image or the video in general, I'm very excited to hear it. Pop it in the comments, or if you've got any results from the homework sheet, by all means share them as well. I'd love to see them. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time. Feel free to like, subscribe, press any and all buttons that make you feel happy, and I'll talk to you in the next one. You have a great day. Bye.